Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to host James Dorsey, an old friend, but he is, apart from that, a senior fellow focused on Middle East and North Africa. He was based in Turkey some time ago as a journalist. He's a veteran and award-winning journalist, worked for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times, and he has been a hardworking academic at this after his journalism career, which a journalist is always a journalist, I think. You may comment on this, James. He has a widely acclaimed blog, which I am a fan of. It's called The Turbulent World of Middle East Soccer. I really do like it, James. And he also co-directs the Institute of Fan Culture of the University of Würzburg. There are lots more to, I can just, go on and on, but those who know you, and those who don't know you, I think they should go and read your biography. So thank you for accepting this. You are based in Singapore. I know we have a lot time difference, and my first question is, James, a lot is happening. Are you okay there? I mean, I see that you're healthy. You're as handsome as you were before. So how is everything in Singapore? Under control?
Well, frankly, if under current circumstances, you've got to be somewhere on the globe, then Singapore is the place to be. They've managed the crisis very well. They've had one major slip up, which was that they did not recognize the situation in the dormitories for migrant workers. And as a result, they had thousands and thousands of cases. But within the community itself, this is one of the best health systems in the world. And they've managed it very well. Today, you have frequently days where you have zero cases, at least zero cases within the Singapore community. You do have cases from people coming in on flights, and they're immediately isolated. And if you have cases, you can count them on one hand, on the fingers of one hand. So this is not a bad place to be.
Well, I do sincerely wish that we will be under control too, but it's not in control at the moment, which I am so sad about. Let's go to the international affairs. A lot is happening in the international affairs and around Turkey. And you are an important person for me because you have been in Turkey and you still in the Middle East. I mean, not physically, but you are still in the affairs, and you can see it from a distance, which I think is very healthy at the moment. And I like your opinion and your observations from there, from where you sit. The recent talks between it's no longer a talk, but the love affair between Arabs and the Israelis, it's interesting. It has not been an all of a sudden incident, but how do you see it? Do you think it's going to be a long-lasting love affair?
Well, I think what you have is two things. First of all, you have a new reality in the Middle East. It's not a new reality that suddenly emerged today or when the United Arab Emirates decided to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. It's been a new reality that has been emerging for quite some time. I think one of the key elements of that new reality or two key elements. One is that particularly the Arab world is moving away and has moved away from the notion that there is a transnational or a regional ideology that binds. So whether that was pan-Arabism, the notion that Arab states were one essentially, or pan-Islamism, the notion that the community of the faithful is one, those notions have disappeared. And what you now have is a group of whatever it is, 25, 30 countries a majority Arab, but not exclusively Arab, who all have their own national interests. I think the second shift that has taken place is that Arab strategy has failed, particularly with regard to Israel. So the basis of the Arab peace plan that was adopted in 2002 was that you would exchange recognition in exchange for land and a Palestinian state. We're 20 years on. That has not happened. Nor did the earlier peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and Jordan produce that. So when the Palestinians say that they were betrayed, what they're really saying is, you've deprived us of a trump card. That trump card wasn't worth anything. Now, that is not to say that the recognition by Bahrain and by the United Arab Emirates is going to change Israeli policies. It's not. But it is a recognition of a new reality, and that reality is reinforced by the United States. Not in the sense that this is the reality that they wanted, but in the sense that nobody is quite sure how reliable the United States is as an ally. Whether or not it's Trump or Biden after the next election. And so therefore, Middle Eastern states are hedging their bets. Israel is one of the strongest powers in the Middle East. And the final point I'll make on this is that certainly in the case of the United Arab Emirates, this move, the image of the United Arab Emirates has been fraying at the edges in Washington because of its relationship with Saudi Arabia, because of the war in Yemen, because of the intervention in Libya, the assertiveness. And what the UAE has done in one fell swoop, earned very important brownie points that are going to be valid irrespective of who wins the US election.
Okay. So before me asking you what's going to happen to Turkey in this picture, or what is there a place for Turkey, let me ask you what's Saudi Arabia will be doing shortly. Will Saudi Arabia join the two states, or what is it? I mean, it's they seem to be the leader of this group, or maybe not. What do you say?
Well, that's the $64,000 question.
Yes.
I think as a matter of principle, I think as a matter of principle, the Saudis would like to take their time. Now, if you look at what the Saudis have done until now, they've actually been gesturing and signaling that they have no problem with normalization. The Saudis are, of course, in a different boat than the UAE or Bahrain, both in terms of for domestic reasons, but also because they are the custodians of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And they see themselves as a leader of the Islamic world. And therefore, when Saudi Arabia makes a move like this, it will carry a very different weight than that of the UAE or Bahrain. And as much as Saudi Arabia is an autocracy, the autocrat does put his ear to the ground and does know what public opinion is and decides when he wants to ignore that and when he feels it's better not to ignore that. Now, the Saudis have made a number of gestures. They now allow civilian Israeli commercial aircraft to travel through Saudi airspace. You've had the publication this week of a think tank report in Riyadh that praises Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's efforts to modernize religious education. Bahrain would not have recognized Israel without Saudi consent. What it may very well flip everything in terms of the Saudis is, again, the US election. With Trump in the White House, basically, Mohammed bin Salman has an archangel who will protect him no matter what. That's not going to be the relationship if we get a President Biden. And therefore, the Saudis may well feel whatever it is that public sentiment is, whether in the kingdom or in the broader Muslim world, that it is a Saudi interest at that moment to recognize Israel because of what is changing in Washington.
Well, what's happening shows me that we know very little about this Arab world in Turkey, even though we are so near in with the physical geography, or all of us are in the Muslim community if you think categorically. But reading one of your articles about this public opinion, I thought to myself that, was there a public opinion in these countries? I mean, are the administrations looking what the public says about the moves? So what is the public opinion in Saudi Arabia? Is it that important? You said it is, and that's why they were cautious about taking steps. But what really is going on with the public opinion in those, perhaps not all of them are united under the same opinion, but what is it?
Well, let me try and answer the question in a sense, in a broader sense. Of course, there's public opinion. The issue is whether or not public opinion can be expressed. And while all of the Gulf states are autocracies, the margins in terms of the ability to express differ. So if you look at Bahrain in the last few days, you've had demonstrations against the recognition. You've had statements by by civil society organizations, for example, the Bahrain Bar Association. On the other hand, if you look at the UAE, there are no margins, period. And so whatever expression that you've seen of dissent has been expressions by exiles or people who live outside of the country. And the same is basically true for Saudi Arabia, although in Saudi Arabia, again, in contrast to the UAE, for example, in the UAE, you truly get penalized for what you do on social media. In Saudi Arabia, there are margins for dissent. So one of the gestures that the Saudis made with an eye on Washington towards the Israelis was that the Imam of the Grand Mosque in Mecca gave a sermon in which he spoke in great length about Prophet Muhammad's relations with the Jews, how he had drunk from a bottle of water while his shield, and died while his shield was being held. Neighbor converted to Islam.
James,
the reaction on social media was fierce. And it was a reflection not only of public sentiment or a sentiment among a segment of the Saudi public in terms of recognition of Israel. It was also a reflection, even though not stated quite in those terms, of the lack of credit, or the Saudi religious establishment losing credibility because they've become parrots of the regime. They've been subjugated into basically submission. So yes, public opinion is there. What, in terms of trying to define what public opinion is, the Saudi or the Emirati press are hardly a guide. It's state-controlled media. And so what is published there is officially sanctioned. But you have a number of non-Saudi, non-Middle Eastern or institutions, 3 or 4, who work through local polling companies and have a track record of more than a decade in polling public opinion. And what emerges from that is that Palestine is a foreign policy concern among Gulf public opinion, among the Gulf public. Whether it's, in the past it was the #1 concern, now it's sort of, because of Iran, the #2 concern. but it's still a major concern. And that's something that Gulf rulers understand and then have to make a decision of whether or not they can afford, or whether or not the issue is of such importance that they decide to do it despite public opinion.
Okay, so interesting, very interesting. How about Turkey? Has Turkey missed anything yet, or what is it? How do you see it? What's when you look at the broader picture? We are no longer friends with Arabs. We're no longer friends with anyone. Actually, that's going to be another question for you. It's the strategy of loneliness, if there is a strategy like that in the foreign policy in the history. But with this particular movement in the Middle East, Arab and Israeli, is there a place in the picture for Turkey, or have we missed anything, or what we have missed? What do you see?
Well, the way I would look at it is, I would look at three things. One is policy, one is style, and one is the regional environment. Fundamentally, Turkish policy has not changed. If you look at the Eastern Mediterranean, the issue of Cyprus, the relationship with Greece, Turkish interest in Libya, all of these things are things that predate the rise of the AKP. And fundamentally, Erdogan hasn't really changed policies. What he's done, and this is where the style comes in, he's much more emotional about things. He's much more assertive, or aggressive if you wish. He's much more willing to use military force if necessary. And so that's what I mean by style. The third issue is regional environment. I mentioned at the beginning of all of this that it's a new reality in the Middle East. That's true with regard to Israel and the Arab states, but it's also true for the Middle East as such, including Turkey. So you have the Syrian war. Now, you can agree or disagree on long-standing Turkish policy, again predating Erdogan with regard to the Kurds. But if you take that fundamental policy as your starting point, it was 1 and 1 is 2 that Turkey was not going to stand for a Kurdish entity of any kind on the Syrian side of the border, even if in effect the Kurdish autonomous region in Iraq has been a success story for Turkey. That's one. Two, you got a very clear divide in terms of popular revolts and popular movements. And I would argue, even if Turkey handled it wrongly, it was on the right side of history, if you wish. So, with other words, Turkey did support the popular revolts, which Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, were in fact sort of the leadership of a counter-revolution. And I would argue, and this includes Turkey, if the last decade, and I used the term already in 2011, was a decade of defiance and dissent that started off with the toppling of 4 Arab leaders, ended with the toppling of 4 Arab leaders, Sudan, Algeria, Lebanon, and Iraq, even if only in Sudan have we seen a systemic change. The next decade, fueled by the economic fallout of the pandemic, and fueled by the way leaders have mismanaged the pandemic, is going to be another decade of defiance and dissent. So in that sense, I think that Turkey got it right. What that meant was that it positioned itself diametrically opposed to particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that see these revolts as an existential threat and are willing to go to whatever length it takes to try and roll them back. Now, what complicates the issue is that Turkey's made a political choice. And the political choice is that it chose to back political Islam, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or other expressions of political Islam. And in that, again, it positioned itself diametrically to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and particularly the UAE, even more than Saudi Arabia, which is obsessed by the issue of political Islam. And so what you're getting is basically a fault line, if you wish, on which on the one hand side, you have the Saudis, you have the UAE, you have the Israelis, and you have a number of countries that basically are on the Saudi side of the fault line, but they're trying to keep some degree of distance and some neutral ground, if you wish. And then you have on the other side of the equation, you have Turkey, you have Iran, you have Qatar. Now, there is movement in a sense. So if you look at the fact that Malaysia in December of last year, supported by Turkey, supported by initially by the Pakistanis, supported by Qatar, supported by Iran, held a Muslim summit that was designed to challenge Saudi hegemony with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Most recently, in the last several weeks, you are seeing a rift between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which were very close allies. And you see the Pakistanis looking towards Turkey and Iran. You have the success of Turkish soap operas, Ertugrul, first and foremost, in Pakistan. So there is movement there. So I'm not sure that I would argue that Turkey stands alone. I also think, as a last point, it's not that Turkey's turning away from the West, in my mind, or turning towards the Russians. I think that Turkey realizes that we are in a global period of transition in which we are shaping a new world order, if you wish, one that's probably going to be at least bipolar, if not multipolar. And I think that within that equation and within that space, Turkey is trying to carve out its own space as a regional, not as a global power, as a regional power that has relations with both. It doesn't articulate that very well. It doesn't project it very well. But when you strip away the rhetoric, and you look at the at the fundamentals of it, I think that's what we are seeing.
And the apparent allies of Turkey, Iran, Qatar, or maybe Malaysia and Pakistan. So it's a interesting group of countries, actually.
Well, the problematic one is Iran.
That's right. That's what I was getting to.
Yeah, frankly, I mean, sure. I mean, interestingly enough, Iran and Qatar are both nations, Turkey to a degree now too, but certainly Iran and Qatar are both nations. When you pronounce the name, it evokes immediately emotion, perceptions, what have you. Fact of the matter is that Qatar, despite the fact that it did support the popular revolts, it does support political Islamic movements and groups. It is the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East is in Qatar.
Yes.
When Israel needs help, and not just financial help, but political help in dealing with Hamas and Gaza, it's Qatar that's able to do that. It's Qatar where you have the Afghan peace talks. So with other words, we're not talking about an alliance here of a bunch of rogues. Not that I would describe Iran as a rogue, don't misunderstand me, or Turkey for that matter. But you're talking about countries that have their own interests. Some of them are more problematic than others, obviously. And Turkey also has, of course, the problem because of its relationship with the West, because of the fact that it's integrated in the West. So with other words, it's a member of the European Council, it's a member of NATO. So the backslide politically in Turkey becomes a problem in a way that would not play in Qatar or in Pakistan, for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in this picture, now we have a new game going on, which is the Eastern Mediterranean. Is that a problem, a real problem, or is it a PR project at the moment? Because many people say that there is not enough oil in the Mediterranean to make all of these states to, fight each other or come to a fighting point or whatever, a crisis point. And in that picture, we see Egypt. And all of a sudden, the last years, it's not a love, it's the hate relationship between the two countries. What do you see there in the Mediterranean? Is it something related to this Middle Eastern, all of that, the Muslim thing?
Sorry. It plays into it, but I think what you're seeing in the Eastern Mediterranean, one is far bigger than Turkey and far bigger than the other littoral states in the Eastern Mediterranean. But also, you've seen, if you wish, mid-game, a sudden paradigm shift. So let's start with the paradigm shift. Prior to the pandemic, prior to the brief Saudi-Russian oil war in March, April, the energy market and the future of the energy market, the geopolitics of the energy market looked a lot different than they look today. So in terms of is it enough or is it not enough, already that question has shifted. One, because oil demand is down, and two, because oil prices and gas prices are down. Now, more importantly, the question is, are they going to go back to where they were? And if they do, that's going to take a fairly long time because we're looking at a sustained period of economic downturn. We're not going to go very quickly economically to where we were prior to the pandemic. But even more so, there are fundamental shifts going on in the energy market. Shifts, for example, electrical cars. China today produces half of the world's electrical cars. You take oil out of the fueling of transportation, and that's a substantial reduction in what the demand is going to be for oil or for gas for that matter. So that's one issue. The second issue is that in a sense, politics is in many ways a short-term business. You kick the can down the road. So the European Union kicked the can down the road when it granted Greek Cyprus access, representing all of the island, without having resolved the conflict or the dispute on the island itself. And that's now coming to haunt everybody. Because those problems over economic zones, over territorial waters, they were there, they were a problem, but without the energy, without the gas finds, those problems were manageable. Now, with the gas fines, suddenly the stakes rose. Now, the third point is a much larger issue that has fallen under the radar. And that's the Chinese presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. So if you look at a map today, what you see is that China has a commanding influence in the port of Piraeus. It has a commanding influence in one of the major container ports of Turkey. And it has a commanding influence in 3 ports in or around Alexandria in Egypt. They have started to take an interest in Tripoli in Lebanon. And they're talking about upgrading substantially the port of Tripoli and linking a railway that would go from Beirut and Tripoli to Latakia in Syria. If and when we get up to a point where we can really talk about reconstruction of Syria, the one country that is capable of really doing that is China. And Russia, which has influence, if not control, of the ports of Tartus and Latakia, will without question give China significant access to those ports. So then you have a situation in which and not to forget the Israeli ports of Haifa and Ashdod. So literally from Greece, right around the Eastern Mediterranean coast, you have at least 10 ports in every single country, 6 or 7 countries, that are controlled or strongly influenced by China. That's a problem for the European Union. It's a problem for the 5th Fleet or 6th Fleet of the United States. It's already signaled that to Israel in terms of facilities in Haifa. So I think there are real issues in the Eastern Mediterranean that are both regional but also global in a sense.
How do you see the Chinese-Turkish relations? Will there be a substantial relation? I mean, yes, they have influence and they have stake in the region, but what do you see the future of China? We don't talk about China that much in this country. We don't talk about other problems, you know, we only talk about the surface. Perhaps it suits the interest of the administration and the people around, or perhaps it's out of ignorance, whatever it is. But what's going to be China relation to Turkey?
I think you've seen several things. You've seen a lot of Chinese economic support for Turkey. Both in terms of investment, in terms of financial support. You've also congruently seen less and less talk in Turkey, certainly from the government and from Erdogan, about the situation of the Uyghurs in northwest China. You've seen a far greater number of arrests of Uyghurs resident in Turkey. Granted, you have not seen really extraditions as demanded by China of Uyghurs back to China. And I think that would be a very difficult thing for Turkey to do. But there is clearly, particularly given the economic situation in Turkey, there is clearly a move towards China and a Chinese interest. I mean, Turkey is one of the major powers in the Middle East and will be that irrespective of what happens in and it has the geographical location. Plus, of course, it has some degree of special relationship with the Turkic world that stretches from Turkey into China. So China has intrinsic interests in Turkey, and Turkey has, if you wish, an opportunistic interest at the moment to try and improve relations and tighten relations with China.
You've been covering foreign policy all your life. Which part of the world is more interesting at the moment?
Look, I find what's happening in the Middle East fascinating. But I also find what's happening in the United States fascinating.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, but what I think you're seeing, and there's a common theme here, which gets expressed in different ways in different parts of the world. There are two themes, if you wish. The one theme is what I was talking about earlier about defiance and dissent. It's almost like a historical cycle, roughly every 50 years. So the last time being the late 1960s with the student revolts, where you have a breakdown in confidence in leadership and in confidence in the political system. And that's what we're seeing with, both in terms of protest, whether it's Black Lives Matter. I think that the vote for Trump in 2016 was in effect a protest vote. And we're seeing it, of course, with the rise of populism. Yes. Which leads me to the second issue, and that's an issue that I think at the moment is in flux, and we'll have to, the US election in a sense will be a milestone in this, but that if you look at the last several years, what we saw, certainly with Trump coming to office, was the rise of what I would call civilizationalist leaders, who thought in terms of civilization rather than in terms of nation state, and who and you had a critical mass of that. So everything from Trump to Viktor Orban to Vladimir Putin to Recep Tayyip Erdogan to Narendra Modi to Xi Jinping. The other thing they all had in common was that they either were autocrats or were undermining democracy. Now, we will have to see what happens, both in terms of the US election, because obviously, if you get Biden back in office, whatever you think of Biden and whatever, but he is going to return an element of values to foreign policy. Whether or not he can, that translates on the ground into every policy in every corner of the world, probably not. But the fact that he returns values as such, I think is going to be very important. Yes. And he's going to, on the one hand, be hardline with China, possibly in a different way from Trump, but he's going to try and rebuild alliances.
And in that alliance, will there be Turkey?
Turkey's a member of NATO.
Of course.
So, Turkey's a member of NATO. I think there'll be a reaching out. The question is to what degree Turkey responds and what the reaching out is going to be. Obviously, the rollback of democratic freedoms in Turkey is going to be an issue. There are going to be other issues, but there are also common interests. But what I wanted to make is a much more fundamental point in terms of, if a Biden election is going to be a milestone and perhaps a shift away from this civilizationalist world as I have described it, the handling of the pandemic is another. I mean, what we've seen by and large, and there are very few countries, I can count them on one hand, that I would exempt from this, is criminal behavior. Criminal behavior for personal or party political advantage. And we've seen hundreds of thousands of deaths.
Yes.
I mean, the pandemic may not have been avoidable. The loss of life may not have been avoidable. The loss of economic loss may not have been avoidable, but not on this scale, either in terms of loss of life or in terms of loss of livelihood. And that's something, when we finally get a grip on all of this, that's not going to go away.
Yes, unfortunately.
And, you know, the first litmus test, particularly given Bob Woodward's revelations
Yeah.
in his book that came out this week, the first litmus test of that will be in November in Washington or in the United States. So in that sense, coming back to your question, you know, we're dealing with global phenomena, some of it almost uncharted history. And it's absolutely, you know, if you're an observer sitting back, it's fascinating. But that may be a cynical way of looking at it.
Oh, yes, I do completely understand you. What happens if Trump is elected again? Will Turkey and the United States, will the two leaders be, I'm sure there will be a different era. I mean, it's not going to be the same, identical. There will be other issues. Will Turkey be comfortable?
Well, there seems to be a comfortable relationship between Trump and Erdogan. So, and there's no reason to assume that that would not continue. But I think that there's a broader question when it comes to the possibility of Trump having a second term. The assumption is that we're going to see another 4 years of disruption, of destruction of the world order that we've known it, the kind of narcissism, civilizational attitudes, racial attitudes that we've seen of Trump. And that's probably true. But there is also a second possibility. I wouldn't bet on it, but I don't think you can take it off the table until you see what happens, is there is a fundamental difference between a first Trump administration and a second Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, this was all about fulfilling electoral promises that involved being a disruptor, that involved being a destroyer, and that were geared towards winning a second term because he had to run an election. Now, unless he thinks that he can fourth the third presidency, in purely legal terms, he would have a second term and that would be it. So he no longer is running for election, which basically means he has some degree of greater freedom to do what he wants, which could mean greater destruction. But it could also mean, and that's what we don't know exactly what Trump wants his legacy to be. His legacy would have been a very different one without the pandemic. America was doing economically very well.
Yes.
All of that has been rolled back. So he can't build or rely on, in a second term, that his legacy is having made America great again. Because America right now has to pick up the pieces and try and put it all back together. And so, you know, I think that at least in theory, until we saw him enter for a second time the White House, we need to keep the option open that he may want his legacy to be something else.
Yes. And let me just, I know I've taken a lot of your time, but let me ask you this last question. How about the Germany factor? Merkel leaving the office, and what is your observation for the near future?
Well, I think you have a much larger question, which is the European Union itself. With other words, the European Union faces challenges of its own. Again, the U.S. election will play into that. I think you had a very clear indication when von der Leyen addressed the European Parliament. They clearly have decided that the cornerstone of their alliances remains the United States, whether it's Trump or not. And they will go out of their way to do that. I think that they have a real problem with with some of the Central European states. I don't think that they can continuously tolerate, if they want to maintain their credibility, in terms of what's happening in Hungary and Poland. I would suspect that despite Germany's reticence, you're going to see an attempt to rebuild relationships with Russia as opposed to China. And in that sense, Putin could not have chosen a worse time to poison one of his opponents. I mean, that was just, beyond the fact that you don't poison people. The timing of it from a Russian perspective, I think, was abominable because it makes it all much more complicated. What I do think, and that's a legacy of Merkel, so you saw under Merkel the rise of the far right in Germany as a result of a policy that really was a very humane policy and the right thing to do when she opened the doors to the migrants and to the refugees. But you're also seeing her legacy or her term come to an end, where the far right is losing ground. And I would assume that you're going to see that reflected in whoever takes over the leadership of the Christian Democratic Party once she does really step down.
In your part of the world, a new incident is the Japanese Prime Minister. I mean, there's a new Japanese Prime Minister. Is Japan going to be in the picture?
It is in the picture.
It is in the picture, but
it is in the picture, and I think it will stay in the picture. I don't think that you're going to see fundamental changes as a result of the new Japanese Prime Minister. He was a very close aide of Abe. If you look at the cabinet that he's putting forward, it's Abe's cabinet. So he's going to retain those policies. I think what you're also, and those policies included greater Japanese assertiveness, trying to get legal changes so that Japan can project militarily on to a greater degree internationally. You're seeing the tight Japanese relations in Southeast Asia, as well as with Australia, New Zealand, and on the other hand, with Japan. So, with other words, within that whole Indo-Pacific environment, Japan's a player, and I don't think that will change with the new prime minister.
So you're not, I mean, you're saying that it's not going to be a rose garden after there will be more pandemics, no rose gardens, no smooth policies, no love affairs. I mean, even though it seems that, people are getting in different alliances, but... Well,
pandemics is one thing. I think, frankly, I'm not a medical expert, nor am I someone who's focused really on health issues and global health issues. But, if you just look at the last 2 decades, we've seen an increasing frequency of epidemics, if not pandemics. From swine flu to SARS to MERS, and that's probably going to continue unless we fundamentally change the way we live. Now, what I also think we're going to see is transition is always uncertain, is always creating a sense of instability, a sense of volatility. And the world is in transition on multiple levels.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see that volatility, that sense of uncertainty, that sense of destabilization continue for quite a bit of time. Normally, if you look at, certainly at political transitions in countries, transitions take anywhere between 10 years to a quarter, even often half a century. So in that sense, we're more at the beginning of this than we are towards the end of it.
Hope
That's not a happy note to end on.
Yes, well, I wish you said a lot of nice, light.
Well, the other way is to look at this is to take the Chinese
soap operas.
We live in interesting times.
Yes, interesting. It's a roller coaster, interesting times and unstable. And I do pity those who are in their old ages at this moment. To grasp the world and to feel secure. I see around me, it's they are having a lot difficult time. It's because it's like, it's so fast and everything is happening at the same time, and you feel the pandemic and the economic instability. So
that's true. That's true. Although I'm not sure it's per definition a question of age. It really is a question of mental agility. You have young people who can't deal with change. So I'm not sure it's really, I take my daughter, who is basically thrown off balance if I change a plan. Her thinking, her life is very structured. So I'm not sure it is a question just of age. I think it really is a question of mental flexibility, mental agility, which obviously, depending on circumstance, depending on conditions of health, with people of age, may or may not get lost.
But see, you are one of those ageless people. It's this comment wasn't directing,
No, look, I intend to live eternally, so so age is meaningless in that sense.
The exception, Jay.
But the point is, I really think it is an issue of mental state and attitude, right, rather than by definition an issue of age. Even if flexibility is often lost as people grow older.
I do agree. Okay. Well, James, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And this was like a 101 foreign affairs in the recent times.
Yeah, but it was great to see you. You looked great, even if this was all virtual. But hopefully the days will return where we can go have a dinner or whatever in Istanbul.
Oh, yes. Looking forward for that. To be touching and feeling the same energy. But thank God we have technology. At least we can see each other. We can talk to each other. So this is okay. I'm trying to be happy, flexible. Take care, James.
Thank you. It was great to see you. It was great doing the show.
Wish
you all the best.
You too.
Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.